you all hate Donald Trump more than you love your country? Mayor Adams?
I respect my president. I respect my
Yes
country.
or no? You're having the hardest time today. Mayor Johnston?
I love my country.
Yes or no?
I love my country.
Okay. Mayor Johnson?
As a son of a pastor, I love everyone and this country.
Mayor Will?
I love my country and my city.
Do you love illegal aliens more than you love your fellow countrymen?
I love all the residents of the city and county.
Mayor Johnston, are you willing to go to jail for violating federal law?
The city of Chicago complies with all laws.
Oh, I highly doubt that.
Good evening, Chicago and beyond. I'm Andy Zopp, and this is a special live edition of Chicago Newsroom 2.0. This afternoon, Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson, along with the mayors of Boston, Denver, and New York City, were summoned before Congress to defend each city's sanctuary policies. Joining me to unpack today's often tense, often performative exchanges between Johnson and members of the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform are roundtable regulars, Block Club Chicago reporter Francia Garcia Hernandez, the co-founder of Just Act Partners, Juatise Gathings, and the host of Munson Tonight, Ashley Munson. Ladies, what a day.
Yes, it was. Thanks for having us.
First of all, I'm thinking the question that most people are asking themselves is, what was the point of today's testimony? Where were we going, Ashley?
More theater.
Yeah.
Theater all around, right? I think about like a house being on fire and people trying to fix a refrigerator when the whole house is like burning down. And I feel like forever Republicans are worried about the wrong things. And I think we saw that today with the mayor of Denver, Boston, and Chicago's Mayor Brandon Johnson. I think they did incredibly well under circumstances. I would have loved to see Mayor Johnson have more. I think he did well, but I think he was working on composing himself so much that he didn't want to give off too much. But I would have loved to see some more sternness.
Yeah. Francia, what is that? You agree that this was all about theater? There was no real substantive objective here, right?
There was no objective here. The mayors had an opportunity to defend and explain what a sanctuary policy is. And one of the things they did is very clearly state why it's important to separate law enforcement, local law enforcement, from immigration enforcement, because these are two different types of operations. And that's something that Mayor Johnson and the other mayors present defended very clearly and said that actually it contributes to public safety, which was one of the arguments that many Republicans brought forward, that immigrants equal more crime, and the mayors of sanctuary cities defended that that's not the case.
Right. Juatise, you agree that there really was no substantive purpose?
Yeah, I think it was definitely, performative and theatrics. I think that there was never a genuine intent to listen, to understand. It was just to create a performance. And as Ashley mentioned, I think the mayor has a reputation sometimes for being the crash out and getting overly excited in the media. And frankly, I thought he did a really good job today. I would like to have seen him crash out a little bit more because they were really asking for him to. But I think he definitely understood the assignment and maintained his composure because he knew what he was there for not for a level of understanding, but for performance. Yeah.
Right. So I think it sounds like so far we're grading him, B plus A.
Certainly, I would give him that grade. I think that this is
Nobody
where
Nobody ever gets an A in my classroom.
That's right. But I think this is where solid B. But I think this is where he shines a bit. Yeah.
No, but I thought he did really well. I thought, before this happened, I said actually to several people, I think they have to decide what the story is, what not the story, but what is the message you want to deliver, and then not get off message. And I thought all of them did a very good job of, to your point, and Francia, I think you nailed it. I mean, they were telling their story, right? So, I mean, do you think they made the points well? You think we got across why we have sanctuary cities in the first place?
I think there were many opportunities when they did. There were often times when Republicans asked questions that were unrelated to immigration enforcement, that were unrelated to the purpose of the hearing, and those clips or those sound bites will definitely gain traction and distract from the points that were made. But both Mayor Johnson and Mayor Wu said very clearly that these ordinances don't prevent immigration officers from doing their job, but they just separate local law enforcement from doing that job and focusing on doing public safety activities. And they stated that, that ordinance is important for immigrants and people from other backgrounds to trust police, local police, and that actually contributes to increasing public safety. So that came across several times in different wording and different manners, but that was an important message.
Can I add?
sure,
I think
of
it's
course.
interesting if you look at the Trust Act that was signed into ordinance by Governor Ronner. This was a Republican governor. Kwame, Attorney General, had a say in that, but a Republican governor signed the states regarding how to act to sanctuary cities and how we respond to that. So I think if you look at the responses in Congress today, you had Rep. Raja Krishnamurthy responding, giving Brandon those talking points in that segue to get some zingers in there. Then you had Representative Darren LaHood, who has never met Mayor Johnson. So if you're so concerned, meet the person that you're complaining about, right? And he talked about his approval rating, which is something to be discussed, but not in that form, especially when I feel like federally we have so much to worry about, and y'all worried about Chicago, Denver, Boston, New York City.
Yeah, I'm gonna just, we'll come back to that. So that point, because I think many of us were worried that that there was going to be an effort to really zing Mayor Johnson and that he would respond, and there were a lot of those efforts. We want to play a clip for you that talks a little bit about shows some of the zingers that Mayor Johnson were sent Mayor Johnson's way.
Do you believe it's acceptable for illegals who commit heinous crimes be released back into the public instead of being detained and deported? Mayor?
Any individual that
Yes or no?
causes harm
Yes or
and
no?
breaks
Okay,
the
Mayor
law
Wu?
should be held accountable.
This is why you have 6% approval rating, because you suck at answering questions.
Chicago. How much has the city of Chicago spent on illegal immigration?
If you're referring to the 2022 up to 2024 of the buses coming from Texas, roughly the same percentage of the state of Texas, about 1% of our overall budget.
What is that? Because we don't have the city's budget in front of me. Numbers.
It's 1%, and if you want the actual calculation, we can make sure someone...
You're the mayor. You don't have the math in front of you.
It's 1% of the overall budget over the last 4 years.
That's why you're a failing
which
mayor.
is
So, obviously, in those clips, I thought the members of Congress weren't really coming across well. Juatise,
the members of Congress really wore me out, particularly with those two clips. And I think Mr. Donald, Florida was a great example of that. But the thing that I respect the most about Mayor Johnson today was his preparation. And I think whoever prepared him very, very well, especially considering, I think one of the agendas of the Republican was to start to put the black and brown communities against each other. And I think in his answers, he was very clear about his responsibility as mayor to protect all Chicagoans, regardless of color, background, ethnicity. Because we know, let's just be honest and frank, when they talk about, asylum seekers or immigrants, they're talking about Latinx individuals. We're not talking about the full population. And they want him to alienate them. And I respect his positioning, but I also respect his preparation. Saying something like 1% has far less of something for the Republicans to get excited about in that moment versus a full number of 180 million or whatever he spent to support migrants. And so I think that the preparation was flawless, but I do think that in those clips, the Republicans looked a little bit out of control because it wasn't even the tone or the energy that Mayor Johnson was meeting the moment with.
Right. I just think, it just kind of, again, we're kind of used to it now, so but it just demeans the whole process. But I want to get back to something you just said, which is about pitting black and brown communities together. Because there were a couple times where they said that, taxpayers don't like you spending money on immigrants. Do you think that was part of the objective, Francia?
I would think so, based on the clips, and depending on which Congress member was speaking, there were several intentions or words that were mentioned to try to message something. But Mayor Brandon Johnson did a good job in saying we are complying with local, federal, and state laws. We're not violating any laws, and we are welcoming all Chicagoans and making sure that investments in the city benefit everybody, regardless of immigration status and ethnicity. So that, I think, was the point that came across often, and that's something that he stuck to and made very clear. Whether he was questioned more hard or pressed at different times, that was a different story, but his answers were consistent.
Yeah. So, speaking about kind of bad behavior between some of the representatives, when they weren't, picking on the mayors, they were yelling at each other. Look at this clip that we have to talk about how they were having issues just with each other.
I'd like to seek unanimous consent to enter into the record this article, and I'll do this as a survivor of sexual violence myself. This is from Courts, March 2018.
Without objection, so ordered.
Data from Texas shows that U.S.-born
Without objection, so ordered. We've put it in the record.
I haven't entered it.
You have what?
Mr. Chair, can I have several articles. I need to enter them. Let me just go ahead with what the articles are, what they speak to.
What's the next article?
Let me proceed. Data from Texas shows that U.S.-born Americans commit more rape and murder than immigrants.
Listen, this trend of you all
Data from
trying to get
Texas
thrown out of
shows
committees
that
so you can get on
US-born
MSNBC is going to
Americans
end.
commit more
We're not
rape.
going to put up with it.
This is
Chair
my
recognizes
procedural
Mr.
right as a
Subramaniam.
member of this committee
You can
to
go.
enter documents
You can go with
into the
Mr.
record.
Frost and Mr.
I am
Green.
reclaiming my time.
That's
you
what
do
you
not
want.
get to
No.
dictate
Ms. Presley,
how
I've been
I
very.
recite the
I have
articles
been
for
very
the
accommodating
record.
to you, Mr. Subramaniam.
And I
Start
take
the
particular
clock.
umbrage
Start
as a
the clock.
survivor
No, I
of
don't.
sexual violence.
Go.
I will enter into the record. This is my right. Thank you.
So, ouch. You know, I mean, I think it seemed like there was a little bit more going on there, right? I mean, does that feel like appropriate?
You know, sometimes you got to respond like Representative Jasmine Crockett.
Yeah.
You know, I think a lot that has happened is because of the tensions that are in Congress and across the country. I'm not sure if that's appropriate, but also this is becoming the norm in Congress, right? Where you have people speaking over each other, and some of them trying to get the sound bites and things like that. But I think we'll be seeing more of this as we progress under this administration, for sure.
Well, and I think, I guess this is really the real question. I think ultimately, how do you think, average Americans who see that, ultimately, what do you think they think of their government, Juatise?
You know, I have to believe that they'd be disappointed by it, but as a proud member of the 92% club that voted for a different choice for our country, I have to say that they knew what they were signing up for. So I think that this is behavior that they've deemed as acceptable from the highest office in the land. And I think that that is something concerning to me, considering a person that has a 13-year-old brother and other people trying to teach good character and values. That didn't seem to matter. We knew the behavior and the reputation of this administration, and we still welcome that back in. And so I don't think people are as alarmed as you and I or folks around this table are, because they knew exactly what they were signing up for.
Absolutely. Right. Well, I think what is said was that the real underlying point there was Representative Presley was trying to get a point out, right? And so not only was he just being rude to her, but he didn't want to hear the point, which was, by the way, sexual assault crimes, not a shocking fact that more crimes are committed by Americans than by illegal immigrants, right? By residents. And so, because it undercuts the story that they're trying to say, which I think is disconcerting. But I thought many of the Democratic representatives did a good job of trying to support the mayors. Francia, what did you think?
Yes, several Democratic members stated different points and different messages that the administration under President Donald Trump and Republicans have stated and repeated that have almost become like common narrative and common knowledge. Many of these are inaccurate, such as saying like all immigrants are criminals, or anyone who crosses the border is a criminal, and that has been stated by the White House press secretary before. So I think many of the Democratic Congress people made points to combat that misinformation and make sure that people got the right facts, and the mayors had an opportunity to share that, including the fact that, sanctuary policies do not prevent federal immigration enforcement to operate in cities like Chicago, Denver, or New York. ICE agents can come, DHS can come and do their operations. They're just not going to cooperate with local police.
Right. Terrific. Well said. And as usual, ladies, it's been a tremendous conversation, and I really appreciate you and all your inputs. And I think all in all, a good day for the mayors. For our mayor, for the city of Chicago, we had the opportunity to see him do well on a national stage, which was great. But also, I thought all the mayors, and we didn't talk about Mayor Adams, so we'll just move on.
Table that for later.
The other mayors all did great. On the other side of the break, I'll be joined by DEI experts Chris Powell, Moji Akinde, and Kevin Davis to help us understand what DEI and meritocracy are, and more importantly, are not. Stay with us.
Every community has a story, a pulse, a voice waiting to be heard. At CAN TV, we bring these stories to life, from the heart of Chicago to your living room. Join us in supporting hyper-local television. Your backing helps us cover what matters directly in our communities, unfiltered and upfront. Help tell the important stories of our communities. Become a program underwriter today.
CAN TV is the lens through which Chicago's stories are told, harnessing the unifying power of community television. With CAN TV On Demand, immerse yourself in the richness of our city through exclusive stories and programs tailored just for you, connecting you to the heartbeats of our streets, the voices of our people, and the spirit that makes Chicago unique. Discover the strength of your community on CAN TV On Demand.
Since the current president has taken office, 2 terms have been dominating the conversation in boardrooms, policy debates, and corporate America: DEI and meritocracy. But what do these terms really mean in today's landscape? Are they in conflict, or can they coexist? To help unpack the rhetoric, explore the realities, and discuss what's at stake as companies and institutions navigate these shifting priorities, I'm joined at the roundtable by the CEO of Telemetrics, Chris Powell, Talent, Culture, and Social Impact Strategist, Moji Akinde, and the Senior Director of Brand Strategy for Erie Family Health Center, Kevin Davis. Chris, Moji, Kevin, thank you so much for joining me today. So, first of all, let's start with kind of the fundamental premise that has been being pushed by the administration, that somehow these DEI policies are discriminatory, illegal, unfair. Is that really what DEI policies that you all work with? Is that what you're trying to do? Is discriminate against other, take one group and discriminate against somebody else? Kevin, is that what you're up to over there?
Absolutely not. That's the furthest thing from the truth. And I think, what we're seeing here is just an intentional disparagement of DEI. And conflating it with affirmative action with some of those goals. But the goal of DEI is to level the playing field, to make sure that you can get to that point of meritocracy. There is no meritocracy without DEI and leveling the playing field and getting the right people all the opportunities possible.
Right. Moji, do you agree? Yeah.
I absolutely agree. And I think there's an opportunity as well to actually define and have people understand what DEI means. And it's diversity, equity, and inclusion, and actually take back that acronym that has been co-opted. So when we think about diversity, it's simply the acknowledgement of the different voices and the different identities that exist in our world. Equity, that's the commitment to removing systemic barriers to fairness. And inclusion is the empowerment and the celebration of all of these identities. So when we bring it all together, DEI really is about making sure that no matter who you are, no matter what your identity is, you have a fair shot at success. So meritocracy can say something else, but meritocracy only works if everyone is starting from the same playing field, and that's not the case. And DEI works to help close that gap.
Right. So there's so much that you just said in there that I need to unpack. So I'm gonna try and take it one at a time. So first, I'm going to start with, you talked about kind of systemic discrimination and issues. One of the underlying premises of this administration, and if you've seen any of the memos that they've been sending out to people, is that that's a mistake. There was no systemic, it's a falsehood that the country was built on systemic racism or practices and policies that were discriminatory. How do we even manage that issue? How do you even say that in the world today? Like that didn't happen. From the White House, by the way, built from people who weren't getting paid for their labor.
There's that part.
That part, right? Well, it's kind of the bridge from the conversation we were just talking about meritocracy. And, meritocracy is both a philosophy and a practice. And so when you think about what we're hearing out of this administration around DEI being, persona non grata, the DEI, elements of DEI actually are the practice of measuring the philosophy of meritocracy. And so if you don't have the practice of measurement around measuring, you could measure equity, you could measure inclusion, you could measure all of these things. And if you're saying that's persona non grata, then you just have a philosophy that's not grounded in anything. And so to hear this coming out of the administration is more like what I call theatrics. It's fluff. It's more fluff than substance in that sense.
But isn't also kind of the underlying premise, and this goes back again to something Moji said, where she's talking about how diversity is really about bringing in a broader group. But isn't it really the underlying theme with all this is it's not about bringing the group. It's about black and white or black and brown, and they're not. They're not really thinking about it. They're framing it, pretty clearly in terms of black and brown. And maybe women too. They throw women under the bus too. Is that what you're hearing, Kevin?
That's exactly what I'm hearing, and I think that it's kind of similar to the election when folks start to go to Google and say, can I take my vote back, or what does a tariff mean? You're starting to see more people going back and looking and learning what DEI includes. Right. So we start to talk about FMLA. We start to talk about some of the different parental leaves and so on and so forth, or different accommodations. And the way that it has been painted is a recruitment tactic to get unqualified or underqualified black and brown people into office. So they've reduced this conversation just to recruitment and job placement, when that's just the tip of the iceberg. That's the conversation, but how do we get there? Then what happens after that? And I think folks are finally starting to get around to seeing that this just isn't about skipping the line or lowering the bar. It's about getting as many diverse perspectives in a room beyond the conversation around recruitment.
Yeah. So, Moji, you said something else. Like I said, there was a lot to unpack in there. You said something else about taking back, that they've stolen the term, right? Yes. And that they've made it, something that it wasn't intended to be. So how do we start getting people to really get back to, when we're talking about DEI and diversity and equity and inclusion, what's the pathway to start reframing that, or not getting back to the conversation the way it's supposed to be?
Absolutely. And to even start off, I believe that part of the reasons that the term has been co-opted is very similar to what Kevin said. It's intended to try to put divide into our society, because once people think that, it's simply about the black and brown people, it's simply about the women, it doesn't affect me. So people are likely to be more complacent about these changes until it's too late and they see that it affects them. Now, in terms of taking back the narrative, I encourage us, especially DEI practitioners, to start shifting the conversation from ideology to impact. And what I mean by that is the impact that these narratives are having on the business, the impact that it's having on our society, and start re-educating everyone on this is really what the bottom line is. Because when we say, for example, we're looking at a large organization, at the end of the year, when we're trying to determine the company performance factor that goes into the bonuses, that's going to be impacted by the boycotts that are happening right now. It's going to be impacted by the economic blackouts. So at the end of the day, every single person in any organization is going to be impacted by this. So it's a re-education of what's at stake and shifting from ideology to impact. And by we, I mean DEI professionals, stop playing defense and be more proactive.
Right.
I think that we took the common understanding for granted. We thought that people understood what it meant. We knew what it meant, but as we see the larger audience, isn't sure of what it means. So now we have to go back and educate on what DEI is and what it isn't, and have those different conversations. And you're starting to notice people are like, oh, I didn't know that. I thought it was just this thing here. But to your point, when you look back at these companies that have strong DEI values and they're able to measure the impact, they have greater results. There's higher employee engagement or customer satisfaction. And that is the message that the administration wants to shut down. If you have metrics, we don't want to hear that. We're going to come after you, because they know that it works. There's that unity, and they want that division.
So right, and that's why we were talking earlier on the last segment about the fact that the chairman of the committee was shutting down Representative Presley because she was trying to state some facts that he didn't want to hear, and it's the same thing. And part of that is by making this discussion pejorative, right? You know, the many of the communications that went out to federal employees on DEI were very much like, you've been committing a crime. You need to stop committing that crime and violating the law, which is kind of horrifying because so nobody wants to talk about the facts. And that to me that was we went from this what we know people are trying to do, which is make workplaces better, to you're violating the law. I mean, overnight, and which of course then has a chilling effect, right, Chris?
Well, it further reinforces what I call leadership by fear, right? So if you put somebody in a fearful position, they're going to shrink, become less than, and so the impact of being more inclusive and equitable gets diminished. And so I remind folks every day we have to assure ourselves and gird ourselves up for the attack, because what's right is right. And in this world, where can we exclude anything? Where is it going?
Right.
That's the thing I mean, and we already know that 38% of teams that are diverse outperform teams that aren't diverse.
Absolutely.
We've got data and proof points on this point and after. But again, we still find ourselves in this conversation. So to Calvin's point, we've got to re-educate and re-inform ourselves of what diversity, equity, and inclusion really is.
Right, and I think, and I want to circle back now to this concept of meritocracy, or really just merit-based, right? Because that's the idea. They're like, well, we're going to get rid of diversity and equity and inclusion, and now we're going to focus on merit-based. But that, of course, now is coming from an administration that has indicated that they don't really care about merit, right? So if you look at some of the appointees, I was looking at most recently just General Brown, who was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and they fired him and then replaced him with a guy who's not qualified for the basic ground rules of what you're supposed to have for being a chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I mean, so how are we supposed to balance this conversation, Kevin, when you have people going like, well, we're gonna focus on talent and performance, and when they don't, and of course they're saying they're going to do that, but they're firing people wholesale, right? Not asking people to what you do, is it substantive, how do you do it, right? So how do we have a conversation about the fact that DEI and excellence are together, not apart?
I think that it's challenging watching these appointments, and I think what you're seeing is a shift of control, like systemic control of, for them, meritocracy is having access to these people in this circle or going to the right school, and that's it. It's not the performance, it's not the job, the job duties or deliverables there. And so it's a hard conversation in our own organizations to say, hey, we want to focus on this meritocracy after we've made sure we level the playing field. And it's really we need to wait and just kind of see how this is going to play out. There's probably going to be a number of failures, and you just kind of have to wait. But it's a hard message to convey, and you're also trying to figure out how do you keep people empowered. And so you'll see that impact to the morale and culture of organizations. Say, well, if it doesn't matter.
Okay. All right. Well, it's a great point. Unfortunately, we are way out of time, and as you know, this is a live show, so they're gonna turn us off. It's like the Oscars. They're gonna start playing that music in a minute. Thank you all for being here. This was a great conversation. I really appreciate it. I hope you'll come back.
Absolutely.
I have a feeling we'll be inviting you back to talk about this topic of DEI and meritocracy and how we continue to make sure that this misinformation doesn't spread, and we reclaim the concept. That's our time for this week. Thanks to our guests for making time to join me in conversation and community tonight, and thank you, Chicago, for the gifts of your viewership and trust. We don't take either of those things lightly or for granted. You can continue to count on CAN-TV to serve as Chicago's electronic town square and your trusted source of hyper-local news, unblemished and unbiased. Until next time, be well and well-informed.